Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and as joined by always my brother from another mother, the host who despises toast, day one, Mr. Brian E. Roach. Brian, happy holidays to you, sir. How you doing?
I was the victor in the feats of strength. That's all that matters.
I got a lot of problems with you people, and I'm going to let you know about it.
That's right.
Yeah, well, I got a lot of problems with the Steelers' end of season here, pretty much, Brian. But just before I think if you took one Christmas movie, applied a name to it that would describe the 2019 Pittsburgh Steelers, it would be Die Hard.
Yeah, that's not a bad choice. And yes, that's a Christmas movie.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I was looking for. It was like this long pause. I'm like, Brian, don't do it to me, man. Don't do it to me. You know, sometimes we're like, oh, man, I know you know these references. Some people may not. Abbott and Costello, you know, Laurel and Hardy. We're like that little duo there where sometimes we're going to butt heads. But here, we're on the same page, my friend. Because you know what? Gremlins just doesn't fit in this description. Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe the Steelers have been fed after midnight now, and this is what's happening. So the roller coaster and the ups and downs it has been, I think we're at the end of the ride where it starts to slow down and it's coming into like the little like plaza or whatever, like we're for the exit. And it's kind of sad because you can't really see. It's like, do you have like a little bit more? Do we have like one more hill we're going to go up and come down? Or is it just going to coast right in and we all get off? I have no idea what's going to happen this Sunday. I hope that some people got my little metaphor there. And I mean, we really don't know what's going to go on Sunday. There are so many people that are hurt on the Steelers. Now they're like, I want to say wounded ducks, pun intended there. And on top of that, on top of that, we have no idea what's going on with the Ravens. We got to assume they're sitting players. So as much as you would say, hey, these rosters could resemble preseason rosters, they most likely will. And that doesn't include all the other factors that are tied into this game, the outcome, and whether or not the Steelers can make the postseason.
Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, as many people have tweeted out and discussed, you know, the scheduling doesn't do them any favors. They're not going to know anything when the game starts. It very well could be similar to the situation that occurred last season, where we're sitting in, you know, or somebody's sitting in Heinz Field. Well, I guess in Baltimore this year instead of Heinz Field, and you know they're not going to know. The one thing that's going to happen is they ain't putting it up on the scoreboard in Baltimore.
Yeah. Well, just
show what's happening in the Texans game. But scoreboard watching is going to be necessary. You're not going to know until after the 425 games are completed. So the Steelers are going to be in limbo as to what their outcome is until that game in Houston is over.
Yeah, and to rewind that for folks who may have forgotten, the Steelers, you know, started to fall apart. There's the roller coaster last year too. These seasons have parallels to them because I could point my finger at so many games that if one thing changed differently in that game, you're not talking about this situation. And this was the same last year as well, where if they would have just gotten that one more victory, where did they end up last year? It was 9-6-1, wasn't it?
9-7. Yeah, 9-6-1.
9-6-1, and they could be 9-7 here, and they're watching what's going on in other games, and they've missed the postseason at 9-7 under Cowher, right? Right after the Super Bowl. So, or the Super Bowl season, I should say. So 9-7 is never a lock. That's why you got to get the double-digit wins and/or win your division. It only works. 9 wins usually only works if you win your division. If you're in like the NFC least or something like that. So like last year, they were limping into the game with the Bengals. And that game was at Heinz Field, and the Ravens and Browns were playing each other, and everyone was counting on. Everybody became Cleveland fans, kind of Pittsburgh Cleveland fans, mingled together, cats and dogs, mass pandemonium, you know, mass hysteria, and to see if the Browns could beat the Ravens, because if the Ravens would have lost, the Steelers would have squeaked into the playoffs, and instead it did not happen, and that all fell apart. But there are other parallels like this too. there was, I remember being in Cleveland many years ago where everyone was keeping their eyes on a Jets-Bills score. And I believe it was Ryan Fitzpatrick with the Jets who threw a bunch of picks there. And, we're all watching on our phones. Most of the Browns fans had left because the Steelers took care of business there. The Browns weren't good that season either, or for the whole decade, we should say. And the Steelers, you're behind. All the fans started to matriculate down into the lower bowl of the stadium there, First Energy, which, by the way, if you ask Siri where the Factory of Sadness is, it will tell you First Energy Stadium in Cleveland. It still works to this day. Somebody didn't believe me during Christmas, Brian. I had to pull it up. Boom. There it was, right on the screen. So you're sitting there behind, we're sitting there behind the visitors bench, behind the Steelers bench, and everybody, we're all getting updates kind of like slow because, data can be spotty in stadiums. And then when you have a cluster of people all on at the same time, trying to stream, trying to update, and all of a sudden everybody's relaying, hey, the Jets blew it. And we're all cheering. And the players, the Steelers are literally, their offense is on the field and they have no idea what's going on because there's crowd noise now. They thought maybe it was like Browns fans actually kind of getting somewhat excited and trying to generate some noise, even though it was, I think, a 2-3 score, whatever at that point. And that's how they found out. Then you go all the way back to they had to wait many years ago when they had an 8-8 season. They had to have all of these different things happen. It was like they had like a .0003 chance of getting into the playoffs. And then everything happened and fell into place. And Kansas City said, hey, was it Andy Reid? Andy Reid decided to sit his starters. And they were playing like Chase Daniel and I forget who else, maybe Niall Davis and some of these guys against the Chargers. And then all of a sudden they were spanking the Chargers. The Chargers start to come back and, they were a blown penalty away from making the postseason because the Chargers forced OT, ends up winning a game that they probably shouldn't have won, but that eliminated the Steelers. So you're in a very similar situation here because the main thing, the two things that really matter, I see all this stuff that's shared. It's like, well, if the Jaguars or the Colts or whoever does this or that, and there's some NFC teams locked in way deep down the tie-breaking scale that I don't really care to go over on any of that. What really matters is the Steelers have to win. If they lose, they could still get in. The other factor of win or lose, despite that, the Titans must lose. Now, they play at the same time. The games were pushed back to 4:25. The thing is, though, Kansas City plays at 1 o'clock. If Kansas City ends up, they're playing the Chargers. There you go, the divisional game. Haunting nightmares coming back to, coming after us. But Kansas City, they pretty much lock up that 3 seed. I don't know. Houston doesn't have much to play for. I don't know that they outright sit people, but they may give people some rest, maybe even a halftime or something. And that may, or may not, you never know, skew the odds and give the Titans that edge in order to squeak in there in the playoffs. And they pretty much control their destiny because they win, they're in. The Steelers kind of screwed the pooch last week. Whatever we want to say about that game against the Jets, whether they could have won or not with all the injuries and things that were occurring during it, they had to win that game. They didn't. They're on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line. And here's how you talked about deja vu and some scary similarities. Having that Andy Reid led Chiefs team have to win, now, in a sense, what we really want is for them to lose the game. We need the Chargers to win. I can't imagine a scenario where that actually occurs, considering the way the Chargers have played, which just means the Chargers probably will win. That's the way this season has gone. But Phillip Rivers this season, man, what a turnover machine he's been. A nightmare at quarterback for them. And so who knows? That's the downside, is that the Texans are going to know whether they need to play. To try and win that third, or lock in whatever seed, the third seed or whatever it is they may be trying to get, or whether they're stuck at 4, right? Yeah, and if that's the scenario, you can, even though Bill O'Brien has said we're going to play to win, we're going to play. You can see, especially if the game were to get a little bit, not, I don't want to say out of hand, but if it starts to go the Titans' way, who have everything to play for, then I can see them going, whatever. But you brought up a point which in the back rooms about wanting there's still that measure of not wanting your in-division rival to get in, right? Which that's still in effect for Houston and Tennessee. Is that the Texans probably would relish keeping the Titans out. Even though it has nothing to do with necessarily having to play them again, it's just that bragging rights of saying, ha 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 ha, ha. The kid from Simpsons, ha ha,
Nelson,
you're not in, yeah, Nelson. So I mean, there's some legitimacy to that, but I don't think it's going to carry a lot of weight. If the Titans are really playing hard and the Texans have nothing to play for, are you going to risk Deshaun Watson? Are you going to risk, any of their star players? Probably not for any length of time. So it'll behoove us to be rooting for the Chargers. Then, of course, as you said, the Steelers' only hope is at this point for the Titans to lose. And if the Titans lose and the Steelers win, they're in. So it's really not a complicated formula. It gets much more complicated if the Steelers cannot manage to beat what will be a second team Ravens team. And even that being said, that's by no means a guarantee. Even though they played them very well, the first time around against the first teamers, it's no guarantee that they're going to come in and just stomp on them. So they still have to take care of their business. And, it's an unfortunate set of scenarios, but, again, I keep flipping back to this and it just goes, and I'm going to accuse Steelers Nation of being spoiled because we are, and I include myself in that. We're spoiled by winning, we're spoiled by success, and we expect, the utmost. But if you went back to the beginning of the year and people told you, Devlin Hodges was going to be your starting quarterback and, you're going to have Deion Kane as one of your primary receivers and Benny Snell is going to be your running back. Kareth White is going to be in your backfield getting significant snaps. And you're still competing for a playoff spot. People would have gone, here, you're smoking crack.
Not necessarily, man. There were some people that were really on the Benny Snell train and telling us about, how he was going to do all these amazing things. And there were, you get your draft nicks and stuff out there that are like, well, they should have took Deion Kane instead of this guy because this other guy is a bum. And then, of course,
those people are all smoking crack anyway. So what difference does it make?
That's true.
As I said, they're smoking crack. Look, you just can't legitimately think that had you thought of the scenario as it stands right now, that they would be on the verge of being in the playoffs and would have, up until last week, had been in control of their own destiny to make the playoffs. It's still an impressive run by a lot of people who may or may not even be involved in the equation next year. We'll have to wait and see how that all turns out. But, it's tough to expect much more. Look, at this point, we talked about it last week. The Steelers needed to win in order to stay in control of things. They no longer have control. And with the way things have played out, the chances that they make the playoffs are dwindling, to say the least, and we'll just have to see how it goes. Nonetheless, I still want to win.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you got to go into Baltimore too, and with whatever this offense is now is probably the thing that's most scary. I mean.
God, yes.
Well, I mean, yeah, and it also doesn't help, too, now. You look at the injury report. There were a bunch of people that were sitting. They practiced on Christmas, where a lot of teams did not.
Yes, they did.
They did. So, I mean, they're of the right mindset, but you have Marquise Pouncey with a knee. You have James Conner with a quad. I don't see either of those guys playing. So now, once again, I mean, they haven't had Conner and they haven't had Pouncey at certain points. If you tell people stuff like that in the offseason, you're like, okay, this team is just doomed to be terrible. They're going to be fourth in the AFC North. And then have a very high draft pick, and, oh, wait, they wasted that on a guy that's very good. Never mind. But, it's still kind of working out in certain ways. Joe Hayden shows up on this report. Thank God Steven Nelson was practicing again because that started to scare me. But now Joe Hayden with the foot. Ramon Foster got a day of rest. So you really just have Pouncey and Conner, I think. I still don't know Juju played last week. I mean, you didn't really know, but I don't know how effective he's going to be. I don't know who all who all are the Ravens going to sit? I mean, you would assume Lamar Jackson. Mark Ingram got hurt in that game last week, and then they're going to have a bye. I don't see that guy playing at all, but it doesn't really matter because they have other guys like Gus Edwards and Justice Hill that could carry the ball and do damage with some change of pace there, too, because Gus Edwards is a load, and they tried to steal Jerome Bettis' nickname with that, which makes me vomit and then swallow and vomit again. And Justice Hill's a guy we liked in the draft process, of course. Mark Andrews has been a guy. He's been, hey, you know what? They had, who's the other guy? Hayden Hurst. We all laughed at them like, well, they're taking Mark Andrews too. And Mark Andrews was a guy that was like on our radar. Remember, we didn't think the Ravens would double dip at that position. It turns out, and some of that has to deal with health too. Mark Andrews has been available and been playing, but he got a little banged up and he's been sitting out now. I don't think they would risk him because he's pretty much their big threat. I haven't actually looked at their statistics here. I'm going to pull him up, Brian, because I want to say he could be like their leading receiver. I know this is a rushing football team. They run for like 200 yards a game. They're just ridiculous the way they're built. This is a magical season for them, but correct me if I'm wrong. Would John Harbaugh have seen this when he was looking across the field in that last Super Bowl the Ravens won? Wasn't Greg Roman the OC for the 49ers? And the whole RPO with Colin Kaepernick and everything with that when they had that kind of vaunted attack. It's very eerily similar, I want to say. Yes, Mark Andrews is the leading receiver on this team. Ding, ding, ding. I win the prize. I didn't need a lifeline either, even though I looked it up. But 64 receptions.
That's a lifeline, my friend. That is a lifeline.
Well, I guessed correctly. I still guessed before I looked it up. But 64 receptions, 852 yards, 10 touchdowns. So that's pretty big. Marquise Hollywood Brown and Willie Snead are, coming in behind that. But, I mean, Marquise Brown's only 44 receptions, 569. Snead's way down there, 28 for 317. Nick Boyle and Hayden Hurst are in the 30s with about 300-ish yards there. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what the makeup or the composition, because we're pretty much assuming they're going to sit offensive players. You'd think maybe Marshall Yanda too. They're already down a center. So, I mean, there's some, when you're benching that up against the Steelers defense, which is hopefully at full strength here, still -2 it, but Alou and Hargrave have been playing, their hearts out. That gives you a chance. You could be in any game as long as you're not succumbing to this 200-yard rushing crazy attack, misdirection, everything. And, the only other thing that really gives you some hope in this is the Steelers had to do this before, and they went to OT. And this was another one of those turning points I was talking about, Brian, where if it wasn't for a crappy roughing the passer penalty on Ola, you don't go to overtime at Heinz Field between these teams in their first matchup in Week 5. And then, of course, Juju fumbles the ball on a great play by Marlon Humphrey in overtime. One of these things don't happen. You may still be we may not be talking about this again. The Steelers may have gotten a W, and a lot of the team from that game closely resembles, at least for the Steelers, what they're going to put on the field Sunday. I understand Mason Rudolph played half of that game. That's when he got knocked out, and everything kind of started to fall apart with the offense. But Duck Hodges was still carrying the torch then. And, I understand James Conner got hurt there too, and Juju was part of that. But there were a lot of people down on Conner and Juju at that point for fumbles and mistakes made in games, and then they weren't available. We don't know exactly how they'll factor into this Week 17 contest. But what I'm trying to say here is that the Steelers are one of the few teams that was able to kind of put a lid on the offense. We even saw the Browns have some success last week, even though they've been banged up, missing players on their defense. And, of course, the guy who he who shall not be named from the Browns who swung a helmet, they didn't have him on the field either, and they were okay. You know what I mean? It's still the Cleveland Browns. But I'm just trying to put, a little bit of a positive spin on this that, you can't just say, well, they're going to go into Baltimore and get spanked. They could very well, because if the offense can't do any more than manage two field goal drives or whatever and lose a time of possession, as the Ravens just keep the system going even with backups. There's only so much the Steelers defense can do, but I still think that it can be at least evenly enough contested. Maybe they'll pull a rabbit out of their hat on offense, get some points they couldn't get against the Jets. Maybe a solid non-roller coaster week of practice with Duck Hodges. Maybe Duck Hodges doesn't see ghosts anymore. Maybe he's back to, maybe he doesn't have a bad game. Everybody has bad games. But what I'm trying to say here is that not all hope is lost.
No, not all hope is lost. And this is going to sound like, again, a deja vu refrain from the last 3 weeks. If they can take care of the football, don't turn it over, and just take what's given to you. I'm going to use one of my favorite words again, matriculate the ball down the field, try and get close. Even if you get field goals, as long as you're consuming time, get points, let the defense do its thing, they can be in this game. Absolutely no question about it. There is no question that this defense is the defense that performed the best against the Ravens this season. There's no reason to think the defense can't do it again. I'm a little concerned about the Joe Hayden injury because, he didn't participate on the 26th. That would be big if he can't go. And that could be problematic as to what they're going to do in that situation. But there's still plenty of reason to anticipate this defense can control the Ravens' offense. The other part of this is, do we really think that with the script being sort of flipped? Because look, RG3, while he's still a mobile quarterback, is not RG3, and he certainly isn't Lamar Jackson at this point. Do they try and run the exact same offense they've been running all year, or do they try and flip the script a little bit on their own and start throwing the ball downfield a lot more? I don't know. I'm sure they're going to attempt to run the ball, but what if they can't? What if the run is just not as successful because the threat of Lamar Jackson running the ball isn't there? You never know what's going to go on, but it'll be interesting for me to see how this offense actually attempts to attack the Steelers defense with this group that they're going to have out there. If they continue to do the same things that they've done all season, there's no guarantee they're going to have any better success, and I would estimate they could have less success with the configuration they're going to throw out there against this Steelers defense. So it's going to behoove the offense to eliminate the mistakes they've made over the last couple weeks. Because the sad truth is you don't have an experienced quarterback within the Steelers offense to fall back on if Duck starts throwing up ducks. Quack, quack.
Well, here's the guy I said I didn't even want to bring up from the practice squad. I mean, and everybody's
Paxton Lynch time, baby.
Oh, let's put him in and see what he can do. No, I mean, everything literally is on the line here. You're not just going to throw it out the window, the baby with the bathwater, Brian. That's what you're doing if you have to go to Paxton Lynch. I mean, if there's an injury to Duck Hodges and he has to come in, and then we see whatever happens. But for those of you who used to cringe about Andruw Jones coming in, trust me, I don't think you want to see this guy. This guy was pretty much just throwing it to the other team constantly. It would be Michael Vick level of proportion of offense once again, which, to be completely honest, they're not too far away from already.
Oh, yeah. No, they're not. Look, it's not. I would imagine this is Duck Hodges' game unless he gets hurt.
Yeah.
Even if he throws 6 picks, what are you going to go to? A guy who's had basically no snaps, who's spent his entire time on the practice squad and wasn't that good when he played for the Broncos? I just don't know.
He was the savior for the Broncos. He was the guy that the Steelers should have drafted instead of Artie Burns, and that's why everybody comes back around full circle to him, and they just think, oh well, hey, let's throw him in there and do this and that. The Seahawks had brought him in. He wasn't even in the NFL last year. The Seahawks brought him in for the offseason. He didn't make the squad there, and that's pretty much it. I get it, 6'7", 244. He had all of the the intangibles, the measurables, or whatever. But everything else just hadn't worked out. I understand there's things with scenery and changes and things like that, but for all intents and purposes, this isn't a guy I see on the Steelers practice or Steelers roster next season. I don't even think they would bring him in as a camp arm unless his contract is already unless it was long enough. I think it was only for this season. It isn't one of those things where they sign a guy at the end of the season, it kicks over, and they have more in the back end for next year. To also add to that, let's talk about some other roster things real quick. JT Barrett signed from Ohio State. Look, folks, practice squad quarterback. Yep. He's not going to be on the active. I would be very shocked that anybody will even say let's just say they even called him up to the active roster, which they will not. He is there to run the scout team and to emulate an RG3 or a Lamar Jackson style offense for the Steelers to practice with. That's why he's there. If he happens to impress a little bit, he could be signed to a futures contract at the end of the season here, because it's already week 17. He could be signed to a futures or reserves contract and brought back into camp next year and see what happens. But this isn't a guy that's going to play Sunday, and even if he were on the active roster, he's not going to get a helmet. Regardless, they're only going to give 2 helmets for quarterbacks. They don't usually dress 3 quarterbacks. It doesn't happen that way. So let's put that one to bed right there. The other one I want to talk about, and this has to deal with offense too, Brian, a lot of, what do you want to say? I wanted to use the word hysteria again because it just sounds pretty good, but I don't know that it fits. But everybody gets so excited and so worked up over just a little bit of news that goes out there. And Roosevelt Nix and Ryan Switzer were put over for the designated to return off of injured reserve list, designation, whatever you want to call that, label. But that's like a 3-week process. These guys haven't sat out long enough. And as we were talking about, and you mentioned, they wouldn't even be available until the playoffs. And we're talking divisional rounds. So the Steelers would have to not only make the playoffs, but win a game in the playoffs in order to have Nix or Switzer on the field. And you got all these people talking about, some people are defending Rosie. Pretty much everyone that I've seen is just all over Ryan Switzer's case. He's frail, he's small, he doesn't do this or that. And it's like, okay, he's a smaller version of Jesse James. What do you want, man? Okay, I get the punt return thing hasn't been good. When has it been good other than Antonio Brown? Come on. I didn't hear people, they weren't all over Eli Rogers even when he was muffing punts in the same way. I just don't get why there isn't a balance there. But when you had Eli or Ryan Switzer, you had a little bit of a different wrinkle to the offense, right? They were even running 4 and 5 wide receiver sets that have disappeared completely from the playbook. I don't even see that many 3 wide receiver sets, to be completely honest. I understand with Juju back out there, they've thrown Deion Kane out there, but it's been pretty much Deontay Johnson and James Washington, and they haven't really had anybody, I don't know, truly operating out of the slot. Every so often, maybe when Vance McDonald's healthy, you kind of slide him over. But I've seen a lot of, 72 reporting eligible, and they've tried to run the football when they actually focused on it. Or they just spread everyone out. Here, you know what? We do have 3 wide receivers, and we're going to throw a tight end and have our running back that we never throw the ball to anyways, go out into the slot or go out wide up top. Or they'll just run the wildcat or whatever be the case. But I just, don't necessarily rag on the guy. Even if he were to catch only like a dozen balls all season, he may throw something in there that the defense actually has to respect and cover, and a little underneath route, maybe it opens up somebody else over the top or in a zone or something, man. I mean, it drives me bonkers. But all of this that I'm saying and talking myself blue in the face, it doesn't matter because neither of these guys are available for Sunday. Exactly. The angst is important. Look, I'm off of the Ryan Switzer bandwagon and have been for a while. I have been. I'm done. So, but I'm not going to get upset about them doing this, making this move. And the reasons are the ones you just said. Plus, the most important one, he's not going to play. It's not an option for this week. It's not an option if they win this week and get in the playoffs next week. It won't be till the divisional round that these guys are available. And you know what? If they get into the divisional round, if they manage to get that far, fine, I'm fine. Bring Ryan Switzer on board and let's see what happens. At that point, we talk a lot about playing with house money. Man, we went to the house next door and stole their money if we're playing at that point. It's not worth the angst. Look, I will be one that says I don't know how Ryan Switzer carves a rollout on this team next season. I just don't see it. Yeah, no, I don't think so either.
But to complain that they're going to activate him or maybe going to activate him, remember, just putting him on IR with the designation to return doesn't mean squat. Doesn't mean he's going to return. Let's hold off on the angst and the hatred until he actually gets returning. And then if you want to go nuts, go nuts. But it'll give you something to complain about that you haven't complained about yet, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I mean, Tazar Skipper, I remember everybody was all excited about that. Is he still on the team? You don't see him. He's not active.
Yeah, he is.
I mean,
always inactive, but yeah.
But here's like the other things too. Like, you had the thing happen with Cam Kelly, and you got Marcus Allen back out there now. No, I didn't hear a whole lot of angst over that either. Losing Rudolph really sucks though, because it's just unfortunate how that happens. You have, Finney come in first snap and boom, and then he gets crushed and gets hurt and now goes on IR when he was actually looking kind of sharp, and you're kind of thinking, hey, they may have had that spark. They may have been able to win that game. And then if they had won that game, we're not having the same kind of conversation here, and you're probably feeling even a little more upbeat about their chances on Sunday. Now you're back to, hey, you got the guy in there that just got benched. He had to come back on the field. They still couldn't pull through that game. Just kind of sucks. You know what I mean? I don't really know what else we could say other than TJ Watt wins the team MVP award and should be the defensive player of the year. I don't even know who else you want to put in that category. If it isn't him, I'm going to be angry regardless.
Yeah, look, I think as I said last week, we're biased. We think it should be him, but there's no doubt the qualifications are there. He's got the stats, he's got the splash plays, he's got the game-changing type plays that you need to be a defensive player of the year, and it certainly is warranted. Are there other guys out there who have had seasons where they should be in that conversation? Sure. Do I think TJ Watt should get it above them? Yes, I do. And is that a biased view? Probably, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah, that's kind of the truth there. Well, Brian, just one last thing. One of these writers with Sporting News thinks that the Steelers will end up making it in, but they also think the Cowboys will too. So, I mean, hey, you know what? I had two things that I had to say though, and I said these during the last week. Hey, at least for all the people who hate Mike Tomlin, at least you don't have Jason Garrett. And for all intents and purposes, take a look at the Cowboys team that has high-dollar guys such as Ezekiel Elliott and Amari Cooper and soon-to-be Dak Prescott. He hasn't been paid yet. And you want to talk about limping around. You look at the, 7-8 Dallas Cowboys trying to get into the playoffs here at 8-8, and we're not talking about the Steelers. We need the Steelers to be 9-7, although they could still get in at 8-8. But then that opens up the doors for the Raiders too, if you're in that situation, which we don't want to see them make it either. But this Dallas Cowboys team has scored. They scored 9 points, 9 points on Sunday. With all of these, they're not limping around like the Steelers are, and that kind of is crazy. And then the other team I wanted to rag on too was the $96 million quarterback that plays for the Minnesota Vikings, that they couldn't generate anything either. They scored a whole whopping 10 points. So even when things look down and at their darkest and their most bleak, you could still find the silver lining of, hey, here's a guy that's making basically the NFL's version of the minimum wage and possibly gets the job done. So, Brian, thanks once again for joining me today, my friend, and hopefully we'll have good tidings to speak about.
Absolutely. I look forward to our conversation in the postgame. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best.
Here we go. That's all you can say.
Here we go.
Yep. And folks, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name's Joe. His name's Brian. We'll talk to you on the flip side, the backside of this game. Let's see what the Steelers can do in Baltimore. Until then, we encourage everyone to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.